Adrian was the kind of man who could walk into any room and turn heads without uttering a word. With striking looks and effortless charm, he believed he had the world at his feet. He prided himself on being unstoppable, toying with hearts as though it were all a harmless game. Some people warned his victims before they fell for him, but their cautionary tales usually fell on deaf ears. After all, Adrian had an uncanny ability to make anyone feel special, at least until he moved on to the next conquest. But there's a dangerous illusion in believing you can treat others however you please without consequence. Life has a way of evening the scales, sometimes in the most unexpected and unsettling forms. The story of Adrian serves as a sobering reminder that no matter how powerful or untouchable one feels, there's always a reckoning lurking somewhere in the future. Adrian's childhood friends would have told you he always had an inflated sense of pride. From an early age, he realized that his looks gave him certain advantages. In high school, girls hovered around him, fascinated by his confidence. By the time he reached adulthood, Adrian had embraced an unapologetic approach to relationships. He had multiple partners at once, lied easily, and showed no real remorse when ending things. The trail of heartbreak he left behind grew longer every year, but he considered it inconsequential. Among the many women who fell under his spell was Naomi. She was steady, patient, and profoundly in love with Adrian despite seeing hints of his recklessness. Initially, she believed she could change him. Adrian had met Naomi 12 years earlier, and though he promised her marriage and a future, he never truly intended to commit. He even went so far as to meet her parents, shaking hands and sharing laughs with them under the guise of a future son-in-law. Naomi, trusting in Adrian's word, pushed away other suitors because she believed fervently that Adrian would keep his promise. Yet there was one critical deal-breaker that Adrian never admitted to Naomi. He wanted to marry someone he perceived as untouched and perfectly pure. In his mind, Naomi wasn't worthy of becoming his wife, even though she had given him her unwavering loyalty. This hypocrisy never troubled his conscience. He saw no conflict between his own rampant behavior and his desire for a partner who lived by a standard he himself did not respect. Despite the reckless days, Naomi continued to hold out hope. She was convinced Adrian would see her goodness and eventually make things right. It never crossed her mind that he had already decided to abandon her as soon as he found a more suitable bride. The deeper tragedy was that Naomi invested over a decade of her life in someone who took everything she offered and discarded her devotion like an old toy. She was unaware that Adrian was preparing to publicly renounce any future with her, leaving her both humiliated and heartbroken in the process. But that wasn't the whole story. In what appeared to be a sudden twist, Adrian announced to his close friends that he was finally ready to settle down. Their initial response was cynical laughter. Nobody believed he could walk away from his fast life. But Adrian had grown fearful of his own behavior, and more importantly, he dreaded the possibility of ending up with a partner as cunning as himself. In his mind, the only way to safeguard his ego and control was to find a woman who had never been involved with anyone else. To achieve this new image, Adrian staged a spectacular life makeover. He abruptly severed ties with most of his girlfriends, blocked Naomi's calls, and removed any hint of his past from social media. Then he made his move into the local church scene. Every Sunday morning, Adrian arrived early, smiling broadly at everyone in the foyer. He volunteered for committees, read verses, and joined a prayer group, each step meticulously calculated to win him a sterling reputation. Before long, he laid eyes on Clara. Known for her gentle nature and strong spiritual devotion, Clara was exactly the kind of virtuous woman Adrian had in mind. She was considered a role model, cherished for her humility and sincerity. Hearing rumors about Adrian's former ways, Clara was initially suspicious, but he dazzled her with a version of himself that seemed genuinely transformed. He fasted with the church, prayed fervently at gatherings, and recited scriptures as though he'd lived by them his whole life. Even the most skeptical observers started to wonder if Adrian had truly changed. However, beneath this pious facade, he was still the same man. Adrian visited other women under the cover of darkness, believing he could outsmart everyone. In his eyes, A public performance of morality was enough to hoodwink Clara. He wanted to ensure she believed his intentions were pure, but the truth was far from that, and what happened next would shock everyone. Clara eventually accepted Adrian's marriage proposal, believing in his repentance. Their engagement became the talk of the community, with church members championing the romance as a story of redemption and second chances. On the wedding day, Adrian wore a tailored suit and a triumphant smile. He gazed at Clara walking down the aisle, certain he had triumphed over fate by securing a wife who appeared flawless in every sense. The ceremony was impressive, a grand church setting, a heartfelt sermon about love and responsibility, and endless congratulations from friends and family. Adrian beamed with pride as vows were exchanged, relishing the applause and blessings pouring over them. Everyone thought it was a match made in heaven, but only Adrian knew the mask he wore was becoming more elaborate by the day. Later that night, in the quiet of their bedroom, the first hint of something otherworldly emerged. Adrian awoke around midnight, sensing a strange stillness. Turning to check on his new wife, he nearly jumped out of bed. Clara was lying on her back, eyes wide open, yet she appeared to be in deep sleep. The sight of her motionless gaze and rigid demeanor rattled him more than he could admit. When he gently shook her awake, she blinked as though nothing were amiss. "Are you okay?" Adrian whispered. Clara nodded softly, dismissing his concerns with a gentle smile. She explained that she occasionally experienced unusual sleep patterns and urged him not to worry. Though relieved that she was conscious and unharmed, Adrian couldn't shake the ominous feeling that something about their union was more complicated than he had anticipated. But the real terror was only beginning. After the wedding, Adrian gradually slipped back into his old habits. Church attendance became sporadic, and secret encounters with other women soon picked up speed. He felt secure, convinced that his perfect wife was at home and too respectful to question him outright. But life had set a trap he never saw coming. On one of these late-night escapades, Adrian suddenly felt an overwhelming wave of dizziness. As he tried to rise from the couch in a dimly lit apartment, his knees buckled and he dropped to the floor, unconscious. The terrified woman he was with screamed for help, summoning neighbors who rushed him to the hospital. Doctors ran every test they could think of, yet nothing physical seemed wrong. Released the next morning, Adrian brushed off the incident as exhaustion and stress. But it happened again within a week. This time, as soon as he tried to make a move on another woman, his vision blurred and he hit the floor, out cold. Panicked whispers circulated among the women he attempted to woo, and more than one fled in terror when he collapsed in their presence. Adrian's fear expanded each day, but his arrogance wouldn't let him accept that these episodes had a clear cause. He suspected maybe Naomi had cursed him in a fit of revenge. Yet no matter where he looked for help, physicians, spiritualists, or acquaintances, nobody offered a satisfying explanation. Some laughed, chalking it up to guilt, while others shook their heads, dismissing his stories as paranoia. And all the while, Adrian refused to simply stay faithful, determined to prove he could still live life on his terms. But he was about to discover that he had angered someone far more dangerous. In his desperation, Adrian became convinced Naomi was behind his mysterious collapses. After all, she had every reason to resent him. 12 wasted years, a promise of marriage never fulfilled, and a final betrayal that left her in anguish. He tried to contact her in the hope of settling any vendetta, but Naomi had vanished. When he visited her house, it stood empty. Friends had no idea where she might be, and phone numbers that once worked now led to dead ends. This seeming disappearance both worried and enraged Adrian. He'd always liked having the upper hand, and Naomi slipping away cut into his sense of control. He told his friend Marcus about his suspicions. Marcus was stunned at how quickly Adrian blamed Naomi. After listening patiently, Marcus gave him a thoughtful, cryptic response. "Are you sure you're looking in the right direction?" The question rattled Adrian more than he expected. Marcus was a longtime companion, someone who had witnessed Adrian's escapades since their teenage years. He remembered every instance Adrian boasted about his conquests and scorned the feelings of those who fell for him. Could Marcus be hinting at something else? Adrian shrugged it off, but couldn't fully bury the discomfort of his friend's words. And soon, the truth would be revealed in the most harrowing way. Adrian's determination to break the chain of collapses drove him to consult an influential prophetess in a distant town. Marcus accompanied him, expressing sympathy and offering to help. At the river's edge at dawn, the prophetess conducted a series of rituals purported to lift any hexes or curses from Adrian's life. Dehydrated and dripping from the so-called cleansing, Adrian emerged feeling somewhat lighter, convinced he'd found his salvation. On returning home, Clara greeted him at the door, eyes clouded with worry. She spoke of a horrifying dream she'd had, warning Adrian not to leave home that day. But his false confidence soared. He believed the ritual had eliminated whatever plagued him. Ignoring Clara's fears, he hopped into his car to test his freedom. If there truly was a curse, he reasoned, he'd have to challenge it one more time to see if it was gone. Fate wasted no time. Driving along a quiet stretch of road, Adrian spotted a woman walking alone. She was breathtaking, with an allure that thrilled his predatory instincts. He pulled over, flashed his trademark smile, and offered a ride. Introducing herself as Lydia, she seemed warm and receptive. Within minutes, they were chatting about small things, and Adrian invited her to a nearby hotel. To his surprise, she agreed without hesitation. Feeling bold, Adrian accompanied Lydia to a private room. He tested his theory carefully, waiting to see if any dizziness would overtake him. Initially, he felt triumphant. Nothing happened. Emboldened, he moved in closer. The moment their lips nearly touched, a scorching heat rippled through his body. His heart raced uncontrollably, and before he could make sense of it, Adrian found himself collapsing, but this time, he remained conscious. Drenched in sweat, he watched Lydia transform into a monstrous snake right before his eyes. He wanted to scream, but his voice refused to obey. The creature coiled around him, its eyes full of a malevolent glint, threatening to end his life then and there. Every second felt like an eternity as Adrian's regrets flashed through his mind. He realized, with crushing clarity, that his own pride and unrepentant behavior had led him into a true nightmare. Then the door burst open. Clara stood there, somehow having followed or tracked him, and the snake abruptly vanished at the sound of her fervent prayers. Adrian lay trembling on the floor, too stunned to do more than gasp. Clara rushed to his side, gazed at him with an odd calmness, and asked a question that made his blood run cold. "What did you do to Marcus?" At that instant, Adrian realized this was never about Naomi. His thoughts spiraled to an event buried in his memory, one that concerned Marcus and the heartbreak Adrian had once inflicted upon him. Years before, Marcus had been in love with someone who meant the world to him. Adrian, driven by ego, decided to prove that no woman was beyond his seductive reach. He slept with Marcus's beloved girlfriend simply to demonstrate his own power, crushing his friend in the process. Marcus's quiet heartbreak evolved over time into a deep resentment. Unbeknownst to Adrian, Marcus had sought out forbidden means to exact revenge. Using a clandestine charm, Marcus intended to ensure that Adrian would collapse whenever he tried to be with another woman, hoping, in essence, to force him into fidelity or at least exact a punishing toll for his infidelity. Clara, whose spiritual gifts included visions and the ability to see events before they unfolded, revealed these truths to Adrian. She had known about his misdeeds for a while, but she believed in the importance of free will. She prayed fervently that he would choose a better path on his own. Yet she also recognized that the malevolent spiritual forces invoked by Marcus had escalated into something more hazardous, eventually manifesting in bizarre illusions and near-fatal events. Adrian was overwhelmed with terror. For so long, he'd assumed Naomi was the mastermind behind his misery, but it had actually been his closest friend. The bitter irony crushed him, and he found himself sobbing on the floor of that hotel room, clinging to Clara's hand as though she were his only anchor in a swirling tempest. That very night, shaken to his core, Adrian confronted Marcus. In a voice raw with shame, he apologized for his past cruelty. The memory of his betrayal, of bragging to others about his conquest, replayed in his mind. Marcus listened in pained silence, admitting that he had lived with bitterness for years and believed punishing Adrian would restore his sense of justice. Yet nothing truly healed until they finally met face to face, confronted the issue, and laid it bare. "I thought making you suffer would help me move on," Marcus said quietly, "but I see now it only fed my own darkness." Adrian wept, feeling for the first time the weight of all the harm he'd caused. To Naomi, to the countless women he used, and to Marcus, who had once been a loyal friend. But the final chapter of Adrian's journey was only beginning. Adrian's decision to leave his double life behind wasn't abrupt, but it was sincere. With Clara's support, he contacted those he had wronged where possible. He asked forgiveness, not expecting acceptance, but wanting to own up to his actions. He delved back into church, this time not for show, but out of genuine remorse. His prayers turned earnest, driven by a longing to cleanse his conscience and become someone better. With time and perseverance, the strange collapses ceased. Marcus, in a gesture of solidarity, undid whatever spiritual bindings he had invoked, acknowledging that forgiveness was healthier than vengeance. The tension between the two men lingered, but they forged a new path, albeit carefully, seeking to rebuild a friendship that was nearly destroyed by betrayal. Months later, Adrian unexpectedly ran into Naomi at an airport terminal. She had moved overseas, married a good man, and seemed happier than ever. Initially, Adrian wasn't sure he had the right to even speak to her, but Naomi, having found her own peace, accepted his apology. The conversation was brief but significant. She told him that in the end she was grateful he had let her go, because she never would have discovered the happiness she now possessed if she'd remained under his spell. That day, Adrian felt something lift from his heart. Stepping away from that terminal, he understood that life had given him a second chance. He wouldn't squander it. Over the years, he remained devoted to Clara. His old arrogance waned, replaced by a humble recognition of how fleeting and dangerous power can be when it's misused. The scars of his past never vanished entirely, but they became a reminder of what unchecked pride could destroy. In the end, Adrian's story stands as a stark lesson. Arrogance might offer a false sense of invincibility, but every action carries a consequence, no matter how long it takes to manifest. We can push our luck, crush hearts, and laugh at people's tears for a time. Eventually, though, what we sow returns to us, sometimes in ways more frightening than we ever imagined. When we treat others with respect, honesty, and kindness, we create a cycle of goodness that fosters genuine happiness. Love, if it is to have lasting significance, must be grounded in sincerity. And above all else, humility remains an anchor that keeps us tethered to compassion, reminding us that we're never too powerful to avoid the consequences of our own wrongdoing. May Adrian's journey serve as a reminder that sincerity in relationships is the bedrock of true joy, and that no one is ever truly above the reckoning of life.